we spend a lot of time, like that's what we're, trying to democratize what is, a fairly complex process that has many, many steps and many, many people involved that, I think in the past tend to land, a lot of broken telephone where you just didn't have good communication. And so we're trying to bridge that.
Oh, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the supply chain and logistics industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, I have joining me Eran Mizrahi from Ingredient Brothers, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today about some flexible logistics strategies, inventory management, but specifically in the food and beverage space. Welcome, Eran.
Thanks so much for having me, Ellen. Looking forward to having a chat about some pretty challenging topics.
Yes, this is a big deal in the industry right now. Before we get started, let's do something a little bit more off topic. So my icebreaker question for you today, you're in the food and beverage industry. What is, or I should say what was your least favorite food as a child? And do you still like it? Do you still not like it today?
That's funny. Two things come to mind straight away. So the first one is Jell-O, and I do not like it today, did not like it as a kid, and thought that the texture was just too funky for me to handle. But then the other one was avocado, and that was also the texture just completely threw me off. And then one day, for some reason, decided to try it again and was blown away. And now that's, I would say eat multiple avocados a weekend. So it's always bizarre to me how, as a kid growing up, just did not like avocado and didn't enjoy eating them. But now it's one of my favorite foods.
I like that. So I have a similar story. If our listeners or our viewers have gone into some of our archives and looked at older episodes, there's one that I talk about where mushrooms. I have a love-hate relationship with mushrooms. You'll have to go find that episode. I can link that. But I was the same with avocados. But the other one that is just funny to me is bell peppers. I did not like bell peppers as a child, and I still am a little bit picky. I only like the red, orange, and yellow ones. I don't like green bell peppers, but bell peppers are a staple in my weekly grocery shop now. That I don't know what took me so long. I guess it could have been a texture, it could have been a flavor, but it's funny how those things as children, you give them a chance after a while, after you've tried some other foods, and then all of a sudden it's your favorite thing.
Yeah, I still think mushrooms are probably the most polarizing vegetable. People definitely do not like them. It's probably one of the most, I would say, when I used to work at a company, we used to do menu planning. Whenever we put mushrooms in a dish, it just did not perform as well because just so many people can tolerate many things. But if there are mushrooms in it, they don't like it. They don't even gravitate towards it at all and would rather not order it.
It is very polarizing, but I do love mushrooms. Those are part of my weekly grocery shop too. All right. So on to our topic, which is, still food and beverage, but the industry is huge nowadays. It's such a diverse landscape of producers and suppliers and consumers at so many different levels because it's not a simple supply chain anymore when it comes to food and beverage. The consumer market has its own issues when we're talking about, direct to consumer companies. Do those issues still exist higher up in the supply chain or when we're talking between, producers and suppliers and not even talking about the end consumer?
Well, I think, those two things are very connected and, it's an interesting way to look at it because if you think about on the consumer side, tastes are changing. So, pretty frequently new companies are coming out with new innovative things all the time. And that change, at the beginning, people are trying different things and experimenting with different products. Sometimes those things start to take off and become more mainstream. And then you have a supply chain on the other side that needs to react. And now, certain food ingredients don't just appear overnight. And so if you take an example of macadamia nuts, which has seen a really big explosion in popularity over the years, but those trees take many, many years to get to maturity. And so it doesn't matter how much demand you have if you can't fulfill the demand, right? Which what lands up happening is obviously it drives up pricing, but you then have suppliers or farmers who take initiative and start to invest in planting more trees, and then people see that the trees are being planted, so then processors start to expand their capital in the hopes that by the time things come to maturity, demand still exists and the product is still relevant. And so I think you do see a lot of the timing of each supply chain is so different, and the ability for each part to react is so different that balancing it is almost impossible. And you have to, try and listen to what the consumer is saying, try and take those signals, try and react as quickly as you can, but at the same time, know that the supply chain in general doesn't change as fast as consumer behavior may want it to change. And so you do, that evolution does take some time, and you see that happening, especially in products like a macadamia nut that take, I think it's, over 5 years to get to some level of maturity where they start to bear some fruit.
Absolutely. And that risk has got to be, even higher on the supplier side when it comes to these, raw ingredients or I mean, in this case, it's an agricultural product where, to your point, you can't just make macadamia nuts happen. It takes time, whether it's a macadamia nut or an almond or an avocado, or, these things take time before they can be ready and, produced on that larger scale. So is part of that risk, the risk that the consumer preferences are going to change within that time period, where if a macadamia tree takes 5 years to be able to produce enough nuts to support its existence, what happens if macadamia nuts aren't popular in 5 years?
Yeah, I think you definitely see that happen where farmers, will swap crops in and out depending on what's happening. And you'll see shifts happen where you've had 1 year of just oversupply of a certain crop. And then the next year people are, planting something different. And this is even in, crops that, let's say, have a shorter time horizon, and that balance. And there's so much capital that's invested in trying to, build out certain supply chains that don't work. I think that suppliers and, processors and farmers have so many years of experience that they understand that, they understand how to read consumer behavior. And so sometimes I'm sure people take bets that aren't correct, but a lot of times they allow the curve to run its course, and they don't try and overcorrect too quickly. And so that's why you see consumer demand build up maybe a little bit more and prices go up a little bit more. And then slowly over time, you start to see that supply easing and easing and easing, and then getting to some normal equilibrium where everyone's happy and making enough money to justify it, but you don't have too many new entrants into the market where you have this bloat of oversupply and then prices come crashing down.
Sure. Well, and your company is kind of in the middle there, where if one supplier doesn't have the necessary ingredients, it's a supplier marketplace. So where Ingredient Brothers steps in is, okay, farmer A doesn't have macadamia nuts for you, but farmers over here do. So how is that supporting the supply chain? Obviously, it's reducing risk in terms of being able to source the materials that are needed. But what else is that addressing in the process?
Well, I think, in Green Brothers, what we're trying to do is, and to your point, we have created a sort of marketplace where, we have a large catalog of vendors that we work with. And I think if you go to the macadamia nut example, where it's grown in a variety of different regions. And so 1 year crops may be good in one region and not good in another region. What we try and do is our main objective is to be a number one ambassador for our customers and find the best supply for them. But at the same time, be a great ambassador to the vendors that we work with. And I think, they rely on us for sales and marketing and to help drive some of the demand and react to some of the changes in market conditions. And so when we start to see shifts because of maybe bad crop years or, something happening on the demand side, our role is to really facilitate communication and to make it easier for everyone to react in time, be it the customer, being able to divert supply from one region to another, or on the vendor side to try and give them signals, hey, like we see demand softening, or, we're seeing something happen in the market that you maybe should take action to. We spend a lot of time, like that's what we're, trying to democratize what is, a fairly complex process that has many, many steps and many, many people involved that, I think in the past tend to land, a lot of broken telephone where you just didn't have good communication. And so we're trying to bridge that. I mean, we're definitely, we're 3-year-old company, so we're nowhere where we want to be, but we're trying to take steps every day to try and improve that communication on both sides, which I think will make the market more efficient for everyone.
Well, and is that communication from the vendor or the supplier side? You were talking about, having market signals or information that they may have about their product, about their industry that is useful and important information for their customers, for these other food and beverage producers who are using these ingredients. That sounds like it's a little bit newer of a concept to be working together in that collaborative way, rather than just, I'm a food producer and I'm placing an order because I need this raw ingredient. Get it for me.
Yeah, I think if you're a large company and you've been buying almonds for years, you probably have great information and you have great relationships and you have the capacity on in your company, or you've worked with distributors who give you access to that. I think what we're trying to do over time is to give everyone access to that, and I think that's that's where we're trying to differentiate, is that if you're a small business and you have 1 or 2 people in your procurement department, you just don't have the capacity to get access to that information. You don't have the depth on the bench and resources and time to really spend the time to understand what you need to know. And so a lot of what we are doing now is really trying to build out the technology and the process to collect the data, make it easy to digest, and then feed to the customers so that they can make more informed decisions, so that they can understand that, hey, this is the best time to contract chia. I may not be the biggest customer in chia, but at least now I have an avenue where I can go and lump my demand with other people's demand and contract the chia for the next 12 months. But some of that exists already with very large companies who have really great information. But how do you use technology to give other companies access who may not have access?
Especially because a lot of the consumer market, and even these smaller ingredients, what is it that I'm trying to say, these smaller companies that produce small batch or very, very thoughtfully curated items, it really is an entrepreneurial market where if you have an idea for a product, you can get it out to marketplace so much easier than you could have in the past. Whether you have your own online distribution, or whether you use, Amazon is one of the easier ones, or Walmart, where you put your product out there. But that does give them a lot of information to mitigate some of that risk and give them a better chance at getting off the ground floor with their new product. I know I was over the weekend, we had a cookout with family and had a recipe, and it used a very specific item that you can't get in stores. You can only order it online. And so, it's one of those things where it was delicious. It was a pork tenderloin that had this marinade on it, but one of the ingredients had to be sourced from a specialized source. So I think that when it comes to some of these new companies, trying to put their products out to market, having that information is going to be so crucial to their success or lack of success.
Yeah, I think we're definitely not where I'd like to be in terms of being able to give smaller companies access, and that's where we're working towards. And I see the struggles as a founder. Coming into this was the vision of the company, was to try and democratize sourcing, and then you start to put in place the things that you need to do, and you realize how difficult it is, and that supporting small businesses is extremely hard, because they require almost the same amount of work as a large company, because they don't always understand the supply chain. They don't understand their products yet. They're trying to figure out their testing. And so how do you give them access to that information at the right cost so that you can, build a good business, and we can build a good business while still helping, smaller businesses and empower them with the right information. But there's so much, it's so difficult right now for them to go out to. So I get questions every day, do you know where I can find this? Or do you know what source I should look for, or where I should find something? And it's very bizarre to me that in a world where you can buy toothpaste in 2 minutes, and you're looking for wholesale ingredients, that it's just it's still very manual. There's no secret directory out there. There isn't really good scorecards to give people access and the ability to, make decisions really quickly. And so it still takes a lot of time. And so I think, over time, that's this type of information we'll start to unlock and feed and give and make accessible to everyone in the market, so that, it's one, they come and work with us, and, we can build and support them as they grow. But at the same time, like, I think there needs to be an organization of data, which will make the whole supply chain a little bit more efficient, because there just isn't right now like one central repository, which makes it easy for everyone to understand where these ingredients coming from, and how much, and what is the pricing, and what is the seasonality, and all of that look like.
So how difficult is it to find like second and third tier suppliers for some of these, very niche ingredients? When I looked through your website, there's some very specific things that your customers are able to purchase through that particular marketplace. And as you said, that there isn't a global directory. As much as we love Google and everyone knows how to use it now, it is not the end all be all when you're trying to find that needle in a haystack. So is it as easy as you make it sound, or is there still a lot of work to do to make sure that information is accessible to these companies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And we've learned by doing a little bit about how difficult it is. And I think one example comes to mind is coconut milk. There's many sources of coconut milk. It's probably relatively easy to find where you can buy it from. But number one, you need to validate the vendor, right? And so there is a lot of work in the compliance side to understand the vendor, do your risk assessment, make sure they've got the right certifications, that they are trustworthy, they have the right capacity, the right pricing, so that you can work with them. And so we have a very high bar that we set at the beginning just to get through that bar. But then once you're through there, now you have coconut milk and you're so excited. But there's the sensory part of it, right? All coconuts taste different. And so if you're working with a consumer package brand that is using something and they want a product that is very coconut forward in flavor, but one of the coconuts that you're getting is just not as coconut forward as the one that they're currently using, you can't substitute it. And so it takes the pull down and down and down. And so it's really interesting to see and work with all these brands, because so much of it comes down to like sensory evaluation. You do all this work, you try and like figure out the right profile of vendor, which takes so much time, the right capacity. You find this perfect mix of everything. The product looks great. And then for some reason that sensory evaluation doesn't work, and the flavor's just a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left of what they're using, and it can't be used as a secondary supply. And so I think it takes a lot of time and a lot of validation to work with your customers to really understand what they're using and how to find a substitute for that. So, that's a lot of what our service is that we have patience. We work with our customers to really go through a lot of rigorous testing before, they're accepting something that will go into their product. And I think it does make it more challenging, but also more fun, because you get to learn a lot about the little intricacies of each of the different ingredients.
That's true. And I know that when it comes to, you brought up coconut milk, we've talked about macadamia nuts. These are all very tropical ingredients. And so this isn't necessarily something that can be put into a bucket of an industry that is strongly affected by nearshoring or onshoring. I'm sure there's some level of that when it comes to some of these suppliers, because it's going to affect, transportation costs and, delivery times and things like that. But I think more importantly, when it comes to some of these ingredients that have to be sourced from other areas of the globe, are are we still struggling with a lot of those ESG certifications or those factors of, are these suppliers taking care of their employees? Are these ethically sourced ingredients? How much of that comes into the conversation? I imagine more when it comes to, smaller batch companies that are doing, smaller batches of things. But, these large companies are going to be forced to, show compliance with a lot of these new regulations that are coming into play.
Yeah, I think, the one thing to always remember is that these suppliers are, their customers are mainly Europe and North America. And if you look at those consumers, especially in Europe today, where the rules are even stricter than in North America, I think you see that suppliers are being forced and challenged to make changes because the consumers are going to vote with their wallet. And yeah, it's definitely a work in progress. And I think that in general, for some commodities, the change will take a lot longer than for others. But you're seeing blanket strategies and policies being put in place by some of the large, some large retailers and large consumer packaged brands companies that is then flowing down to the suppliers. And because supply comes from one region, but a lot of the times there's multiple regions within those regions competing. Everyone wants to make sure that they maintain market share. And you see, even with regulatory compliance and certifications and, just adherence to quality, I think you've seen a huge improvement and shift across the world, right, in terms of standardization and just the level of trust that you can have in a lot of products that come from all over the world. And I think people take that for granted, but that hasn't always been the case. And people are probably every day of their lives consuming products from all over the world, whether they know it or they don't know it. And you've definitely seen an improvement in that. Now, I think that next level on, in terms of ECG and just getting vendors to understand what it is they need to do and how it is they need to comply and what are the steps we can take, right? Can't flip a switch. That doesn't work. But to just stop working with people is also not the solution. In my mind, the solution is to try and partner and find people who are willing to change and willing to be partners to, make improvements and get to a place where we can all be proud of what we consume. And I think, this new wave of consumer that is even, more, pushing more and more on certifications, on understanding or at least feeling confident in the product that they're consuming will impact the whole industry around the world and will result in a lot, people getting treated better. I think, thinking more about the environment and making, the supply chain a lot more sustainable in the future. So, I think it's a lot of positive, in my mind, and I think we're moving in the right direction. It's just supply chains are slow. And so, we just have to keep pushing. And I think we will make a lot of improvements.
So do you think that the transparency of information that you're trying to make available to your customers about your suppliers, do you feel like that is making this easier, or are we able to get back to those suppliers and have those conversations of, if they are not doing everything possible, or if they're not reaching a standard of compliance, that we're able to work with those suppliers in those maybe even remote areas and bringing them up to a level that is socially acceptable?
Yeah. I think we're, I think we're seeing some of that and where we're trying to help is just provide the supplier with like the incentive, which is, hey, this is the opportunity that you're missing because of these factors. And if you can improve on those factors, maybe there will be, opportunity for you. Now, not all suppliers are going to take action. And sometimes the changes are too drastic that it doesn't happen. But I think in general, the right supplier will sit down at the table and try and say, okay, well, what can we do to make these changes? I think that what's tough is that at the moment, it's like very hard to know exactly what needs to happen. And I think everyone's still trying to figure out what level it needs to go down to. It's really, in some cases, when people are like, oh, do you know from the farmer level? And I'm like, well, sometimes the farmer level is like 2 or 3 degrees separation between even the processor and, and the farm. And so there is so much work that needs to happen, and a lot of the industry is very manual and not as well documented until it gets to certain maybe further downstream where you have more regulation. But I think by asking the questions and continuing to push, I think we will go in the right direction. We are seeing that happen, but it definitely will take time. And I think it's not for a lack of trying or lack of willingness. It's just there just needs to be a path and a roadmap to getting there, and also an understanding of what is exactly expected of them, on the other side.
Absolutely. Well, I know marketplaces seem to be the go-to for the consumer. We talked about Amazon briefly a minute ago, because you can get almost anything on Amazon these days. Is it the same when it comes to within the supply chain? Are marketplaces for suppliers, for vendors, are these, is this the way that the market is trending in terms of how they source their materials?
Well, I think if you're a buyer, you hope and you pray that that's
Right.
the way it's going to be, because it's really tough right now to try and manage many vendors and understand who to work with and who you can trust. I think there's a lot of, benefit to something like an Amazon, because you go and you see reviews and you understand other people's experiences, and there's validation and there's like searches and filters, and you're able to almost go through your own buying process without anyone. And then if you have a question at the end, maybe there's one or two other questions that need to be answered that you go somewhere else for, you ask on the forums. And I think in the B2B space, one, for smaller businesses, this has to exist. And unfortunately, it doesn't exist today. And I think we're trying to, aggressively move towards that in some way, where you can give a smaller business access to a certain level of information, before even talking to someone, because that's when it starts to get expensive and it's hard to justify. If you have an account manager working with a small customer for 2 months on a project, it's really hard to justify. But if you can try and automate some of the initial validation and information that you're presenting to people, you can then reduce the cost of a transaction and give people access. Like, I think Alibaba does a great job for suppliers. I think in food, food is very specific. And that's why I'm excited about the opportunity of building Ingredient Brothers, because it has a different flavor. It has different compliance. It has different validation points. And so, that's what we're trying to build towards, where you can give people that same level of trust that some people have when they go into Alibaba and buy certain widgets, and where it's a little bit easier. But it has to be a marketplace, because people are desperate for, their job to be easier, and they don't understand why it wouldn't be when you have all this, technology. Like, forget AI. I mean, we've just had so much other stuff happen over the last 20 years that it doesn't make sense that it doesn't exist, right, in the way that it should. But
the one thing
that means a good
just
opportunity
said
for us if we can make it work.
Hands off. The consumer can do all their research. They can look through the reviews. They can make their choices. They may have a few additional questions. So when it is so hands off, and that's just such a singular journey for the customer, how do you take such a transactional type of business relationship and build that top shelf customer service?
Well, I think if you look at, consumer brands that have built great customer service, I think that there is an approach within the space that can work, where, again, if you're a public company and you're coming to us, we can allocate 4 or 5 people to work on your account, and that's great. If you're a smaller business, we can still allocate resources and give you great customer service. We just need to understand where in the transaction, the relationship, we need to allocate that and be able to answer those questions. And I think, with anything, scale solves a lot of that, where, if you hire someone to do, answer R&D questions and they're getting 1 question a day, well, that doesn't really help. But if suddenly they're getting 100 questions a day and they're able to answer and provide value to a lot of prospective customers at scale, that becomes really exciting. And so I think, with scale, we're going to be able to bring a level of, expertise into the business, that when someone who's smaller needs 20 minutes of someone's time, that's easier for us to give and allocate. And I think that's where, direct to consumer brands have done an amazing job, because they have a lot of information on their websites and they have customer service reps that are well educated. They understand the product. They can answer certain questions. And I think within the B2B space, you just have a little bit of a disconnect. You're either like getting full account management, great service, full suite of everything, or you're not really getting much.
Yeah, you're on your own.
Yeah, you're on your own. And so, I think that, I think if you can take a little bit of what what people have invented already and try and understand how you can make it work within our space, then people could come in and it won't feel so transactional because they can still they can still ask that question and get some technical answers, but they're not spending 5 days with someone. They're spending 20 minutes, 40 minutes, and that becomes a lot easier for us to build out and justify.
So tell me about a customer story where your customer service was able to really deliver something fantastic for one of your customers that was, looking for something and they weren't able to figure it out on their own. What is one of your best customer service stories?
Again, like we work with some great brands. I can't mention their names. We work with some really great brands, and one of the companies came to us and they had a lot of volume within a certain product. And this product was being brought into the US. It was being reprocessed in the US and then sold to them. And through many, many hours of looking and understanding the supply chain, what we realized was we could reduce a significant amount of cost by actually producing this at source and taking some of the steps out that was happening in the US that was, not necessarily value add. It was almost like, repackaging. It wasn't manufacturing. It was just repackaging. And so, by offering, a more aggressive planning support, making sure that they understood how we were going to support them, because as soon as you start doing more and more offshore, you now have longer lead times and you need to be more responsive. And so by doing that, we were able to move some of their, supply and change their supply chain, the structure of their supply chain, so that instead of it getting packed in one package format and then going into another in the US, it was getting packaged in the required package format straight away. You are now able to reduce their costs. It was a great partnership for us. It's very sticky. It's a great supply chain, and we were able to improve service, improve costs. So that's one of those where, it's just a fun problem to solve on how you can bring efficiency and add a lot of value to one of your customers.
Absolutely. And that has nothing to do with what product they were trying to source. It was all about the supply chain and the efficiency within that process. All right, last question. What is the most interesting product available, in your opinion, on your marketplace? There's a lot of interesting ingredients. I want to hear what you think the most interesting one is.
Oh man, I don't. People always ask me these questions, and I always get stumped by these questions. I think from a looks perspective, there's a product, blue spirulina, which is made out of this algae, and everyone's very familiar with the green one, but the blue one is just this beautiful royal blue. And like every time we bring it to a food show, everyone stops and is like, "Is that coloring? Is that edible?" And we even had someone open the container and taste it straight away just to like see that it actually is edible. And I think that's probably one of the most beautiful products that I've ever seen in terms of like a natural blue coloring that I'm most excited about. Another product that I always get excited about is coconut aminos. I don't know why. It's a great alternative to soy. I think it has a lot of like allergen benefits, and it's like gluten free. It's low sodium. I think that one isn't used enough, and I'm a big fan of the coconut. So that one I'm always excited about, and probably have repeated myself about that way too many times.
That's all right. It's good to have passion for your products.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. Thank you, Eran, so much for sharing your insights with us today. To our listeners, if you have a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on the show, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me at podcast@mibach.com with your ideas for guests or topics. As always, thanks for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We're available on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or Spotify. And be sure to tune in next time.
Thank you so much, Ellen.